Very pleasant good afternoon to all of our viewers. We are delighted that you have chosen again to join us for another afternoon to Let's Talk session. Delighted that you have chosen again. We trust that today's program will prove meaningful, as have been the others in the past. We have a special guest for you, but before we introduce our guests, I would like to take the opportunity to let you know that Let's Talk is sponsored by the Southlewood Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We discuss issues. We have been for the last 2 years or so discussing various issues impacting the church and the wider community. And it has just been a delight to share every Sabbath afternoon on this program with you. We invite you at this time to bow your heads for a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, be with us as we go into today's discourse. We ask for your wisdom, your grace, and your guidance. Take full control and have your own way. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, whether you're listening on SLC Adventist, SLC Church channel, whether you're listening on Facebook, Southlewood Conference, or you're listening via Second Advent Radio 101.5 FM or via any of its various streaming platforms, we are just delighted to have you with us this afternoon. We are discussing a very important subject today. The Seventh-day Adventist Church sees itself as God's last-day remnant. It is charged with the special responsibility of sharing a message of hope and warning to Earth's final generation in preparation for the second coming of Jesus. The urgency of the message has led some to be overly aggressive and sometimes confrontational. Those who admonish a more balanced approach have been accused of forming alliances with other denominations. Some have even made the charge of Jesuit infiltration. On today's Let's Talk, we wish to examine this charge of Jesuit infiltration. I've been hearing this a lot in these parts. It's not new, but we want to look at it this afternoon. And with me for this very important discussion is Dr. Kevin Burton. Dr. Burton is the director of the Center for Adventist Research, and he's also assistant professor of church history at the Seventh Adventist Theological Seminary in Bering Spring, Michigan at Andrews University. It is just a delight to have you with us this afternoon, Dr. Burton. Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Talk.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we want to jump right into our discussion. We only have 1 hour and time does go by very quickly. So we want to look at this matter of the charge of Jesuit infiltration in the Seventh Adventist Church. It is by no means a new one. But before we examine this charge specifically, can you talk to us a little bit about the general issue of conspiracy theories and perhaps say why it is so easy for Christians to get drawn into believing in them?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think that it's probably only certain kinds of Christians who get drawn into conspiracy theories. I mean, we certainly have many Christians in our churches, in the Adventist church, as well as other churches that are not at all into conspiracy theories. And so it seems to me, it seems to scholars who have studied it, that the people who tend to be drawn to conspiracy theories, they tend to be more conservative. They tend to be the kind of people who mistrust authorities, or oftentimes they lack a proper education. But to qualify that, there are people with PhDs who get caught up in conspiracy theories too. So that is not necessarily, an education is not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to be free from it. But it seems to be that people with higher education, they are less likely to be drawn to conspiracy theories. Now, I think the Adventists might be more prone to conspiracy theories because our theology has some correspondence with conspiracy theories. Now, I'm not going to demean our theology. I'm a faithful Seventh-day Adventist. I love our message. But think about it for a second. Like the great controversy narrative itself, this is a grand conspiracy. It's actually, you could say, even a grand conspiracy theory, but it's found in Scripture, okay? And so we find faith and truth in that for that reason. But this conspiracy is about the devil and his forces and Christ and his forces waging out this battle that we're caught in the middle of it. And we can call it a conspiracy, and maybe even a conspiracy theory, because I cannot show you the devil. I cannot show you Christ. I cannot prove to you that these entities even exist. I believe they do by faith, by the word of God, by scripture. And so we see the great controversy narrative in the Bible. And yet at the same time, it's kind of like, in some crass sense, like a conspiracy theory. And so if you believe in that, and it maybe can make you more open. I don't think it has to, because I'm a firm believer in the great controversy narrative and all of our fundamental beliefs and theology, but I don't really subscribe to conspiracy theories. I think another aspect of Adventism that lends us to being maybe open to it is this idea of searching for present truth or new light. You've probably heard other Adventists talking about new light. I've heard a lot of Adventists in my life they're searching for new light. They find something in the Bible and they call it new light, and it becomes their big message, and they start championing this. And usually it's something that deviates from core Adventist beliefs and so forth. And so we have a lot of people, because of our heritage, our tradition, that are caught up in that kind of an idea. And there's a historian, a scholar who has studied conspiracy theories, and he talks about something called the finding experience. And this scholar's name is Mark Finster. He's written a great book on conspiracy theories. And he talks about this thing called the finding experience. And it's this idea of like, you find some sort of source that testifies to some sort of corruption of power or truth or whatever. And it actually brings you a physiological thrill or rush, some kind of excitement and vitality in your life to find these things that are so earth-shattering. And that kind of experience is very similar to the kinds of Adventists I've seen that are hunting after new light. And so those are some of the ways that Adventists in particular might be kind of drawn to conspiracy theories in general. And we could give more reasons if we talked about what we are going to talk about today, which is Jesuit infiltration conspiracy theories even more. And that's because Adventists are Protestants in the classic sense, where we are still protesting the Catholic Church and its doctrines and the injustices of ages in the past. So there's also stuff like that we could talk about. But nevertheless, those are some of the reasons I think that we can be prone to conspiracy theories as Adventists.
You have said quite a bit there, and as you said, I thought that it is interesting because the core of our beliefs and what we are called to do as a people, to speak out, to be passionate, to be conservative, these are elements that you have mentioned there, which we may say, quote unquote, are good things. And so to be very passionate about pointing out error and standing up for truth and being aggressive, these are all good things. But how do we keep that in balance? But anyway, let's move on. I want you to explain. Now we're going to go into this matter of Jesuits and why this charge of infiltration. I have heard a lot about Jesuit infiltration. I'm a Seventh Adventist for 40-something years now, and I've heard a lot about Jesuits in the church and the sinister movements behind the Jesuit system. Can you explain to our viewers who are Jesuits and why there may be a suspicion regarding their activities?
Yeah, absolutely. So during the period of history that we call the Counter-Reformation, a few decades after Martin Luther has nailed the 95 Theses and the Protestant Reformation has gotten started, there was a period of time where the Catholic Church responds to the Protestant Reformation, and Protestants typically call it the Counter-Reformation. Some people call it the Catholic Reformation. It just depends on your perspective there. But in any case, during that period, there was a man named Ignatius of Loyola, and he starts to he has a similar kind of experience to Luther, where he feels convicted of sin in a similar kind of way. But rather than running to the idea of righteousness by faith like Luther will do, he finds truth in spiritual disciplines and rigor. And he actually starts and creates a new Catholic order called the Society of Jesus, more commonly known as Jesuits. And they have a very rigorous system of discipline. To get into the society, it takes many months, and you go through many processes, and you have to be approved in all kinds of ways. And this new order is literally rising up in the Counter-Reformation, and their primary objective, one of their primary objectives, is to restore Catholicism in Europe. And so they are literally hunting down Protestants, and they're openly, not secretively, but they are openly trying to combat them in debate or other kinds of ways to subvert Protestantism and to restore Catholicism in Europe. So they're extremely aggressive. And because of this, like immediately, there are conspiracy theories that rise up against the Jesuits, including infiltration narratives where the Jesuits are infiltrating here or infiltrating there. But you go back through and you look at these sources and you don't find any credible evidence that this is actually happening. What you do have is you have lots of sources that attest to Jesuits openly criticizing Protestantism. And guess what? You also have sources that are very, very much out there where Protestants are openly confronting and criticizing Catholicism. And so we're not, as Protestants, necessarily guiltless here. So it's kind of like a battle, really. And so the Jesuit order rises up. Now they become very popular, and by the time there are several thousand Jesuits by the time Ignatius of Loyola will die, and then not too long thereafter, there gets to be about 30,000 of them, and that number holds at that rate for many decades. But the Jesuits, one thing that Protestants don't really often know is the Jesuits were so aggressive that one of the popes actually says this is too much, and they actually officially disband the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, and it's disbanded for a long period of time until it's finally restored. I believe it's in the early 20th century. And so there's a period of time where the Jesuits are not even officially allowed to exist in the Catholic Church. And in more recent decades, I remember from my class at the Seminary, Roman Catholic Life and Thought, I mean, we read some works of Jesuits, and these tended to be people that were more critical of the papacy and critical of papal authority. So my perspective of Jesuits from reading their own stuff is kind of like, well, they're actually pretty, they're often gotten into trouble still because they're pushing against papal authority even today. So anyhow, they're an interesting group of people, and they're very aggressive. At least they were very aggressive in when they started, and so that's where these ideas and anti-Jesuit stories and so forth start to rise up. They start to rise up really at the end of the 16th century when they start.
Now you did indicate earlier that as Seventh-day Adventists, we are Protestants. Mm-hmm. So a part of who we are is this understanding that we are speaking out against the false teachings of Catholicism. Yeah, and we have this in common with other Protestant bodies. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we speak out against the false teachings of Catholicism. I guess mm-hmm. some Protestants have adopted a kind of a friendly approach towards Catholicism, mm-hmm. and because Seventh Adventists tend to be more direct with our preaching and more aggressive in our defense of Adventism and speaking out against the ills, what mm-hmm. we consider to be false teachings, and there are many, the state of the dead, the change of the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, etc. So that there is in our theology something that counters, speaks against Catholicism. Mm-hmm. At the same time, you also mentioned, and let me just slip back to this, very interesting, that you're saying that there was a time when the leaders of the Catholic Church, the popes, actually disbanded the Jesuits, and Jesuits from time to time attack their leadership, the church leadership, and make statements such as that they're not faithful, they're not living up to the responsibilities of their requirements. It's interesting because in the Seventh Adventist Church, you have a lot of people who say that the leaders are not doing the right thing. There's even the charge of apostasy. Now, let's speak directly to the charge. I've heard all sorts of charges of Jesuit infiltration in the church. You didn't give a little bit about it. the why. But if you can say a little bit more, where did this theory arise and
Yeah.
what is behind it exactly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that Jesuit infiltration conspiracy theory it's probably always been a part of Adventist history to a degree. And so I have seen one source all the way back to the Millerite period where there was someone who was worried that Joseph Marsh, one of the Millerite leaders, was a Jesuit leader who had infiltrated the movement. And then eventually he convinces them he's not. And so that there seems to be some level of it there. And then, as Michael Campbell has pointed out in his work, there's the famous case of B.G. Wilkinson, who denounces, I believe it's his name's Albertsworth, who was teaching, I think, at Washington Adventist College, and he denounces him as a Jesuit infiltrator and claims that he has proof of it, which no one ever has seen. And so there are some cases like that, but I don't actually think that it becomes a major sort of force like it is today. And it's not a huge dominant force, but it's very prevalent. And I don't think it was very prevalent in our church before the 1980s. And in my own research, I have focused a lot on a man named Alberto Rivera. Now, Alberto Rivera is not a Seventh-day Adventist, but a lot of Adventists love him. And if you're an Adventist who knows about Jesuit infiltration conspiracy theory, or you believe in conspiracy theories, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Because Alberto Rivera is one of the most well-known supposed Jesuits who had been a Jesuit. He claims to be a Jesuit priest and bishop, who apparently, as his story goes, converts to Protestantism and then starts to expose the Jesuits for all their nefarious deeds. And so he writes a series of comics, literally they're comic books. This is the first one, called Alberto. It came out in 1979. And then another 5 of them follow. After Alberto comes out, the next one is Double Cross. The third one in that series is The Godfathers. Okay. Then there was The Force, and you can see these are really graphic. They're actually very interesting to read. The Four Horsemen, Part 5. The Prophet, which, if you can remind me, I'll tell you some fascinating stuff about that one in particular. Then there's also some related ones here. The Big Betrayal. This is not an Alberto story, but it's a spin-off of Alberto. Then there's the one on the Jesuits. And then there's another one that Alberto himself will publish later from his own, what is it called? Antichrist Information Center Ministries, or something to that effect. And so that's significant. And so Alberto Rivera is very important because he is claiming to be a Jesuit priest who infiltrated Protestant churches and was told to by his authorities, and then later comes out and claims that he is exposing them for what they do. And there are a few other people like that in history, but he is without question the most famous. And so I did a lot of work on his biography, and I'll tell you in a nutshell, it's not true. Rivera apparently was raised in a Catholic home, but he was never a Catholic bishop or Jesuit bishop or priest even. And what you do see is during the period of time where he claims that he is a Jesuit, you see him married, and you see that he has a child, and his child will later die. And you have someone named Gary Metz who did a lot of work to expose the other nefarious deeds that Alberto Rivera is engaged in, all the petty crimes. I think he's involved in stealing some credit cards. There may be even an auto theft in there. There's other things that he does to his own church members, even after he's brought out and he's a full-on evangelical, and he ends up stealing tens of thousands of dollars from his own church members, and gets into all sorts of other crazy kinds of misdemeanors and small kinds of crime. I have gone through a lot of work in getting information on him. So I've collected documentation throughout America on Alberto Rivera, including getting his FBI file. That took several years to get from the federal government, but I've got it. I also got information, packets of primary source documents from Australia and from Great Britain. And so I actually took this very seriously. I wanted to know, hey, is this guy for real? And I can tell you, and I can even show you if we had more time. I'm very happy to show you all of my documents. No, he is not for real. He is either outright lying, or he was actually self-deceived and had convinced himself that he was a Jesuit and he had some sort of mental problem. But he is not a real Jesuit. But nevertheless, in his first comic book here, Alberto, this is in 79. And on page 28, he drops a very important line here for Adventists. It's right here. You can't really see it, but this is talking about Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council that was happening in the 1960s. And after this council, he says that the Jesuits made all of these plans, laid all of these plans, and now I'm quoting here. He says the first Protestant groups they moved on were, dun, 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 the Seventh-day Adventists. We're named here.
Interesting.
We're named here. And so for the first time of which I'm aware, you have some sort of scholar, like some sort of expert. Now, he's a fraud, like I told you, but he is claiming, now it's in a comic book, but he's still claiming that we are being targeted after Vatican II by the Jesuits, and we're not only targeted, but we're named #1. And so this becomes huge for Adventists, and they latch onto it quick. So if you go to YouTube right now and you Google Jesuit Infiltration Conspiracy Theory, you say nothing about Adventists, the top most popular video is an interview of Alberto Rivera. And guess who's interviewing him? A Seventh-day Adventist. And the Seventh-day Adventists produced this video. And Alberto Rivera likes Seventh-day Adventists. You actually see some Seventh-day Adventist sources cited in these comic books. Okay, and so he actually likes Seventh-day Adventists and had a close relationship with certain Adventist people. And so it's during that time where you start to see a lot of things come up. And so you start to see, for example, in print, it gets to the point, and I think it's about 1990, where Clifford Goldstein is going to offer $1,000 for anyone to actually give proof that the Jesuits have infiltrated the General Conference or the Adventist Church. And of course, what is the next thing that happens to Clifford Goldstein? Boom, he's denounced as a Jesuit infiltrator himself. And that's how it works. So people in Alberto's lifetime, they would interview him. And I have these interviews. I have recordings of these interviews. There's many of them on YouTube. I have some that I've got up in other ways, from other places and other sources and individuals. But you can hear them. And like there was one, he's at one evangelical church, and this person is very sincerely, very calmly, without any sort of accusatory tone, just simply asking him, so can you tell me, how did you actually do this? Like, how did it work? Tell us how it actually works, because Alberto never does that. He never actually tells you any real details about how he infiltrated churches and what his authorities told him to do. He has all of these comic books, and none of them actually tell you anything significant. So like there is no way to ever go through and verify, and he actually never gives you any real data. You go and you watch the interview that Jim Marabito does, the one I mentioned that's on YouTube, and Alberto never tells you anything of any significance, any detail. How does he actually do it? Never tells you. He just gives you these really amazing statements and then no kind of evidence to back it up whatsoever. And so in that interview that I was telling you about, this pastor is just saying, okay, how do you do this? And as he's asking these simple questions that can hopefully just verify, because we would all love to know if Jesuits are infiltrating our churches. Everyone would want to know that, right? Alberto immediately gets upset and angry, and then he denounces the guy that's asking him the questions as a Jesuit infiltrator. It's like you can't win. You can never win with this kind of theory, because all it takes is like, well, if you question this, then obviously you're a Jesuit plant. So,
I mean, that's very interesting. And you know, as you were speaking there, I thought, wow, I had Clifford Goldstein 2 weeks ago on this program.
good.
So that it's interesting. Maybe I will hear, well, something that I have heard before, that I myself am a Jesuit infiltrator. So that and you know, I think the matter of making these kinds of charges without any substantial evidence, just
Mhm.
seeing it, but not showing, not giving people why it may be so. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm very, I'm sorry we only have 1 hour because you said some things there. You know, my introduction to Jesuit infiltration ideologies and you know is connected to what I have read about this same gentleman and how he's exposing the Jesuits in the Catholic Church and that kind of thing. So to hear that he is really not genuine is rather very amazing.
Yeah, I have overwhelming amount of documentation to prove that. I ended up writing, the reason I did the research is because I wrote a paper on it for one of my PhD classes. But there are many other ways. You don't even have to do a ton of research, like at least in all the you can do this in another way. There was a man named Brian Onken who wrote another critical piece of Alberto and his story, and he just went through and he analyzed these comic books and said, let's look at the theology and let's look at the history that Alberto is sharing here. And you do that, and you're like, clearly he knows nothing about Catholic theology. He makes many mistakes in his understanding of Catholic theology and history. So let me show you this one. Like, this is called The Prophet. Now, can you tell who it's about from the cover? You should be able to. It's about Islam.
Yes, yes.
Alberto claims in this comic book that the Jesuits founded the Islamic faith, the Muslim faith. Now, there should be some kind of a red flag going in everyone's head right now. If you know anything about history, I told you the rough date, the late 16th century. That's when the Jesuit orders founded by Ignatius of Loyola. Go to any source and it's going to tell you that. Wikipedia, any encyclopedia, any book. That's when they start. When does Islam get started?
And that's a giveaway right there. Yes.
Centuries before that. Centuries before that. Come on, how is that possible? This is nonsense. And yet we have Adventist leaders like Walter Veith, who makes the same claim. And guess what he cites in his footnote? That right there. And the way he cites it, it makes it look like it's an actual book. But you look up his source and it's a comic book. Is that a reliable source, a reliable scholarly source? No. No, it's not. And so a little bit of common sense goes a long way here, which is why I mentioned education at the beginning. Having some education tends to help with this kind of thing, because you can see through the arguments. You can see through how this is just unbelievable in every kind of sense. And so, yeah, it tends to be nonsensical every time you look, and they will tell you. So when asked, when someone was denounced as a Jesuit infiltrator, one of Alberto's his loyal people, they asked one of Alberto's followers, how did I get my Jesuit training? If I'm supposed to be a Jesuit, where did I get it? And they respond and they say, I don't know, maybe you got it in a confessional booth, or maybe you got it in a 30-hour course. What? You're telling me you can become a Jesuit in a confessional booth, like a couple minutes with the priest, and then you're a Jesuit? Or you can take even a 30-hour course and you're a Jesuit? I mean, come on. Like, it doesn't take much research at all to see that that's complete nonsense. And then many other times, time and time again, you look at Samuel Bakioki, an Adventist who taught here at Andrews, and he was denounced as a Jesuit infiltrator. Why? Because the Catholic Church published his dissertation and the Pope's imprimatur is in there. But guess what his book's about? It's about the seventh-day Sabbath and how the Sabbath was changed from Sabbath to Sunday. The Catholic Church does not like that book. And in fact, they've eventually banned that book. And he was the first and the last Protestant to be allowed to study at the Pontifical Gregorian Institute there in Rome. So like, his dissertation caused major problems in the Catholic Church because of what he's arguing. And yet, because it's actually published by them, because they published all the dissertations, or they tended to, then he's a Jesuit. Or take George Knight. George Knight has been He's been accused of being a Jesuit infiltrator. Why? Because he used a Latin phrase in one of his books. I mean, seriously, that's it. You know, and I could go on and on. It tends to always be that way. So how do you prove that someone's a Jesuit infiltrator? It takes maybe a photograph. You see someone here like Burt Beach. We could talk about Burt Beach being denounced as a Jesuit infiltrator because there's a picture of him shaking hands with the Pope. Okay. Ooh. So he must be a Jesuit, you know, so it doesn't take anything. A 2-second handshake, physical contact was all it took to make Burt Beach supposedly a Jesuit. And so these kinds of things are nonsensical. And there has never been any shred of evidence has ever proved that this stuff is true. And
I want to zero in on something. I have seen people make charges and have gone out of their way. You see sometimes a photo with a piece of a hand presenting a medallion to the Pope, and there is something to make it believe that the General Conference president is giving something to the Pope, and you have all these kinds of things without concrete evidence. You know, when you look at the background behind them, you're led to wonder. These individuals who are making these charges without doing real research, and we're talking about research that can stand the scrutiny of academia, and they're making these charges. Are they not eroding trust in the leadership of the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think we should step back and look at the theory of conspiracy theory a bit more to get to a good answer here. So I mentioned to you a book by Mark Finster. Let me grab it really quick. It's a little bit far of a reach for me. I'm on my laptop, so excuse me for 2 seconds.
That's all right. That's fine.
Let me grab it so that you can see it. People can have it in their library if they want it, because it's one of the best books on conspiracy theory that I have read, that deals with theories behind it. And here it is. It's Mark Finster. It's called Conspiracy Theories, Secrecy and Power in American Culture. Now, that's focused on America, but nevertheless, the theories there are more general and broad globally. And he points out, he actually argues against the theory that people who believe in conspiracy theories are paranoid. And there's a historian named Richard Hofstadter who has put this theory out there that the people who accept conspiracy theories are all paranoid. And I think that's wrong. Finster's convinced me that that's wrong. And here's why. It's actually impossible with the way governments are set up to avoid conspiracy theory. Now, why is that the case? It's the case because no one can ever be transparent enough to allow everyone to see exactly what's going on. If you have any kind of organizational structure at all, you're going to have things that happen that not everyone can see. And so as a result of that alone, that allows for conspiracy theories to rise up. And so he actually argues that they're a normal part of government. That doesn't mean that they're good. That doesn't mean that they don't cause problems, because they do. But it also, we have to recognize that some conspiracy theories have turned out to be true on rare occasions. Okay. Now, I'm not trying to give hands and strength to people who believe in Jesuit infiltration conspiracy theory, because there's no evidence for it. Okay. But nevertheless, the point is, does it erode leadership? I think it does, but I also think it does something more. Infiltration conspiracy theories. Now, this is my own theory here that I think is useful. Infiltration conspiracy theories do something very specific. Okay, so I told you that Alberto Rivera writes his first comic book in 1979, and that mentions that they come after Adventists first, after Vatican II. What are we doing? What are we facing in the Adventist church around 1979, 1980, early 1980s? Is everything going great in the Adventist church, or do we have some problems? We have some problems, don't we? This is right when you have the rise of the Desmond Ford crisis, Walter Brimsmead. This is right when you get Walter Ray, Ron Numbers, and other kinds of things that are challenging authority and all kinds of things. And there's one thing that infiltration conspiracy theories do in particular. They allow somebody to recognize a legitimate problem and blame somebody for that problem while also protecting the thing that they love. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean is this. So in the Adventist context, people recognize that there were clear problems in the Adventist church. Well, where did they come from? It must have been the Jesuits. And if you blame the Jesuits for infiltrating the Adventist church and causing these problems, then you actually absolve the Seventh-day Adventist church as an entity of any guilt. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. Adventists are human, and we actually make mistakes. We don't need Jesuits to screw things up for us because we screw things up on our own. We're human. That's just what happens. And the devil is at work too. And so like, we don't need any kind of infiltration conspiracy theory to do that. And so what it does is it's poking at specific leaders. And yes, it can, I think, Dr. Greene, I think it does start to erode authority in general. Because when you open that door and you start criticizing this one leader as a Jesuit infiltrator, well, how do you know his friend over here isn't? Because there's this friend over here is defending him. So like, then you can just start picking away one by one and then take down the whole thing. And so, yes, I do think it erodes leadership, and I think it causes big problems. I don't think that the people tend to be the paranoid type so much. I think that I know lots of people I love and respect who believe in Jesuit infiltration conspiracy theories. I mean, it's so prevalent, and they're not crazy people. You know, I think that they're misguided, but they're not crazy. So I'm trying to be nuanced here, and I hope you can understand and appreciate that.
I appreciate this very much. In fact, there is so much that we need to talk about, and we have very limited time.
Yeah.
I know you are not going to be able to make it back next week, but we're going to have to find some time soon. I hope I can get to your schedule, that we can get a time soon to continue this very important discussion, because we have so much that we need to talk about. You know, the other day, and I'm kind of running ahead of myself, but recently we had a situation where a young man said to me, listen, he was planning to go to our university in Trinidad, University of the Southern Caribbean, to do theology. He felt God had called him to the gospel ministry. Mm-hmm. And an influential individual in his life said to him, don't go to that school. It's packed with Jesuits. They're going to make you a Jesuit. And he had this burden not to go because he didn't want to become a Jesuit. Now that, I think, is really sad. It's pathetic. And you have charges. If somebody is preaching something, you know, I made some quotations from the New International Version in a sermon, and then I heard, oh, I'm a Jesuit because I'm using the New International Version, and these kinds of things. I think, and unfortunately, many members catch on to these things, and without any substantive evidence, they begin to say, well, if so-and-so is saying this, there must be some truth in it. I think this is very dangerous.
Yeah, oh, it is. It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, it's very frustrating on so many levels. But yeah, you're right. It's so prevalent. It's very common. One thing that's sad is it seems that a lot of these people, whether they'll explicitly say it or not, they have this idea that somehow you can be deceptively brainwashed into becoming a Jesuit or a Catholic. And it's like, do you not realize that is degrading your agency and also the power of God to keep you safe in life? God gave us brains to think and to use for his honor and glory. So do we not have the ability to I mean, if it's that simple, then you have to live in a cave to be safe. I mean, how on earth could you ever be safe from anything? Because everyone else out there thinks differently than you do to some degree. So you could never have any kind of conversation, because you might find out at some point the person that's been your friend has some sort of heresy or thing that you disagree with. So like,
it's interesting that you made that point, because you know, I have said, if we make the Jesuits to be so powerful, we are almost making them more powerful than God.
Yes.
And we have to have the belief that God is able to keep us. So we don't have to be fearful. We know the message we preach. It's Bible-based. It's solid. We are committed to Jesus Christ. But I want to just ask a couple of questions that one or two
Sure.
of our viewers have presented. We are almost out of time already, but somebody is asking here, how could a Jesuit be identified when he or she approaches?
Jesuits will probably identify themselves. Jesuits also, they write the name or the letters SJ after their letters and books and writings and so forth, and that stands for Society of Jesus. Jesuits tend to be very open that they're Jesuits. It's not a secret order, not like the Masonic order or something like that, which is a secret society. They're open. They're not hiding the fact that they're Jesuits. And so I don't think you should be overly concerned about it. I think that you should just simply try to be kind and loving to the people that you encounter and treat them as God's creature, because God has made all of us in his own image, including the Jesuits. And so don't worry about it so much. Be rooted in your faith in the Bible, in Christ, and be willing to talk with people. If you can't talk with anyone else, if you're so concerned about being somehow ruined and your own spirituality ruined, then you can never witness for God like he asks you to do. In order to be God's ambassador and witness, as scripture says, you have to go out into the world and you have to talk to the people who need to be reached. And that means you need to treat them with respect. You need to listen to them and be confident in your own faith, no matter what comes. So I hope that helps.
Most definitely. Here's another question that someone's asking. If a Jesuit becomes an Adventist, wouldn't he still be branded as a Jesuit?
Oh, could be. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. If a Jesuit did convert to becoming an Adventist, then I'm sure you would have Adventists out there who are pretty sure he never really converted to Adventism and that he's just an infiltrator. Oh yeah. I have a feeling it would be very hard for that individual to ever be really fully accepted into the Adventist church, which is very sad.
Definitely. You know, yeah. I mean, you can imagine somebody saying, oh, this person is not genuine. They're coming in to infiltrate the church.
Oh yeah. It's hard enough for someone who's a Catholic, you know, it's hard enough for someone who had been a Catholic to convert. And then if they become a leader and people find out that they were Catholic beforehand, then that's hard enough for them. I mean, they're going to get attacked, by being a Jesuit infiltrator at some point down the line. It just happens. It's really tragic. It's actually really sad, but it does happen.
Now, I want to talk to the matter of our approach to other Christians a bit, because yes, we are discussing Jesuit infiltration theory, but I think what this does to a great extent is that it forces people to begin to become so suspicious that we don't want to associate. Yep. You know, I for example, I sit on an ecclesiastical commission where there is this is a body that the government asked to do certain things, but there's a Catholic, well, let's say a member of the Christian Council of Churches, a member of the Evangelical Association, a member of the Baptist and independent ministries, etc. And so if we're having a national independence program or a day of prayer, they would ask us to plan it. And I've had people saying, oh, well, you know, this is a clear indication that the church has lost its way because Adventists are meeting with other Christians, they're praying with other Christians. Right. What is so wrong with Seventh Adventists praying with other Christians? How are we going to win them if we are not their friends? So my question really is, how do we relate to other Christians? Is anything wrong with Seventh Adventists having friends with other Christians, with even attending their church services, etc., and trying to be a sister to them?
Boy, absolutely not. And I think one of the things I can do here is speak as an Adventist historian, because if you look at Adventist history, you find that when we started as a movement during the Millerite period, this was all the different churches in America meeting together and worshiping. Now, of course, we come out of Babylon, we come out and we start our own thing. But even after that, you see our early pioneers regularly engaging and dialoguing with other Christians. If you read the sources, like you could read John Byington, the first General Conference president's diary, and you'll see that sometimes he actually went to church on Sunday in a Methodist church just because he wanted to. Okay? And he had been a Methodist before. He loved John Wesley. He loved a lot of the aspects of the theology, and he does that. Oh no, was he a Jesuit maybe? Ooh, our first General Conference president. That starts early. So, I mean, you can see over and over again that we have pioneer after pioneer that are actively engaging and dialoguing with other people. With some people that came really close with us, like the Seventh-day Baptists, they actually send official delegates to our GC sessions, and we actually send official delegates to their GC sessions. And that happened for decades. And so we were not afraid of the so-called ecumenism scare that starts to rise up in the late 1900s, late 19th century, I should say, and early 20th century. We're not there. That's a recent thing that's risen up with the rise of fundamentalism in the early 20th century and created a different kind of Adventism that everyone thinks has just been the gospel truth for Adventists the whole time. And it's not. When we started, we were very much okay with dialoguing with and even communing with non-Adventist Christians.
Mhm. Another thing is there is also the charge that the Jesuits have not only come into the church, but they have worked to create some subtle changes. Had people say, "Oh, I can't use the Seventh Adventist hymnal any longer because we used to have a church hymnal and now they've changed it to the Seventh Adventist hymnal." And there's a number they quote. I think it's 403, and they say, "Oh, this song says, 'Let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun." And they say, "Oh, that's Jesuit theology." No, so when somebody says, for example, that the hymns in the hymnal are encouraging sun worship, and this is the work of Jesuits, how do you respond to something like that?
The easiest and the best way is, okay, if let's take you seriously for a minute. If that is the case, if the Jesuits did get a song into our hymnal, or maybe a few of them, prove it to me. Show me the evidence. The evidence that is typically given, as you said, is like, oh, well, this is Jesuit theology. Oh, yeah? Is that really the case? Breaking bread on your knees and so forth? Can you prove to me that that's Jesuit theology and that no other Christians anywhere would agree to that kind of a statement? See, the way that this goes down and breaks down is there will not be evidence for that, and there is no evidence for that. And the thing is, too, I would add about hymns is music tends to be something that unites Christians. There's a lot of non-Adventist hymns in our hymnal, and that's because we as Adventists have appreciated them for so long. And I'll also add that every kind of songbook that we've come out with in our history has always been criticized by someone somewhere. Okay, so, and that's because we love music, right? But like, it's a very intimate kind of thing. And so people get upset if this song's cut out or this song's not, that made it in there. And so that is not new. But if you're going to say that the Jesuits are responsible for that, you have a lot of work to do to prove that theory to be true. And the simple fact is you're not going to be able to do it.
You know, I'm so happy that you are sharing from that historical perspective, because somebody listening to this program may say, well, I don't expect anything else. But, genuinely, I want people to be able to look seriously at what is their rationale for making certain statements. Somebody told you something, somebody handed you a tract, somebody handed you something that says, oh, this is the case. But the other thing that a lot of these people use is, there is some document that they pick up on YouTube or on Facebook or WhatsApp, and it all of a sudden becomes gospel. That concerns me because, as I alluded to earlier, you find that ultimately individuals now become distrustful of the leadership of the church. They begin to think that the General Conference has backslidden, and all of a sudden, if the Seventh Adventist Church is losing its way, then what of God's remnant?
Yep, right, absolutely, and that's happened. I mean, you have people like that have started out with the Jesuit infiltration kind of stuff, and their independent ministry has led them out of the Adventist church and become very critical. And they will say that the Adventist church is apostatized, that we've become Babylon, and all these kinds of that has definitely happened. And it's sad because you're right. It tends to be something on social media. Here's an image, here's a document, but people don't know anymore. A lot of people don't know how to analyze a document. Just because you see an image doesn't mean it's a genuine image, especially in the day and age that we're in, where there's Photoshop and green screen and all kinds of stuff. Seeing is not necessarily believing. And there are institutions and entities out there, organizations that actually, they exist because they're putting fake news out there, like The Onion. The Onion specializes in creating fake news because it's fun, it's satire, but their intent was that they are clear, this is not real, but it's just funny, but this kind of stuff, people just don't know how to analyze things and analyze data and sources in this day and age, which is sad. I think, and I'll add this too, Dr. Greene. Unfortunately, I think that there's also a very strong bias here, so that people who are hard on the Jesuit infiltration conspiracy, hard believers in this, they would probably, if they ever even started watching this conversation, they would probably denounce both of us as Jesuit infiltrators. If they believed it so strongly, they wouldn't even listen to reason or listen to evidence. And so there's a strong bias wall that just gets put up in people's minds, and they don't want the truth. If it really is true that Jesuits infiltrate the Adventist church, then show us. I will always believe it if you can prove it to me, but no one can, because it's never happened. So anyhow, that's another thing that I think is involved in this whole dynamic, is that wall of bias.
Genuinely, I think we have a very important message to share. We really do believe that Jesus is coming soon. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not in any way suggesting that the church is perfect. Mm-hmm. and not. And that all of our leaders are perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. Yep. And it is quite okay for people to push for reformation and to push for revival, and that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, this is God's church. Yep. And we cannot afford to be fighting ourselves and not focusing on sharing the message of salvation. That is so very important.
Absolutely.
Now here's a question. Yeah. Somebody's asking, just for clarification, who was it that called or accused George Knight and Clifford Goldstein as Jesuit? And they're asking, was it general people or the Adventist church?
No, and it wasn't any official person or group. It's some random Adventist somewhere. I don't know who it was or their names. But if you go on Google and you search for like Adventists, or if you search for like Jesuits in the General Conference or something like that, Clifford Goldstein is like one of the top hits. And I am the one who is pretty sure, because I did research on this, that the reason he's denounced as a Jesuit is because he offers $1,000 of his own personal money in the review, I think twice, if anyone can produce any actual evidence. And it's very much right after this that he's denounced as a Jesuit infiltrator. And that just fits the paradigm, so I don't know who actually was the one who did it, but it's completely nonsense. I mean, Cliff is a Jew. He's a Jew. He's an ethnic Jew, and he's an Adventist now. He's not a Catholic. He was never a Catholic. He's married. Jesuits can't get married, and so forth. So it's like, come on. I mean, simple facts those are the things. That's all that's required to derail this kind of conspiracy theory, because it's that ridiculous. So
well, Dr. Burton, we only have 2 more minutes, and I'm wondering if you can just, in those 2 minutes, say something. This is going to be our final thing, because our time is fastly going. For those people who are really fearful that something is wrong with our universities, that they may send their children there and they may come back Catholics or Jesuits. What can you say to allay that fear?
I can tell you that when I came to the seminary in 2011, I was shocked at what I heard. I was shocked at the ideas I heard circulating in the seminary. I was shocked because I couldn't believe that there were Adventists who believed some of the stuff that I heard. And you know what? Why is that the case? It's simply this: whenever you go to an institution of higher learning, you're with many other groups of people. And whenever you add groups of people and you start to talk about the things that really matter, you start to realize that there's a lot of diversity. And that is normal. That is simply normal. Now, I think I came out okay. And I think that everyone else that I was there with, for the most part, comes out okay. And there might have been one or two people who didn't. I don't know. But like all the people that I'm friends with and everything, we all came out okay. And here's the thing. That should strengthen your faith. And it has strengthened mine. Whenever you learn and study, that's when you really learn and know how to defend what you believe. And that is important. God gave us a brain to use it. He wants us to be able to communicate with people and to be able to know how to respond to different things out there. And so just because I mentioned there was lots of ideas out there, believe me, there wasn't anything like super heretical. Like no one was there like saying, oh yeah, God didn't create the world and it evolved or something like none of that. And it wasn't from the professors, it was from the students that I was shocked. It wasn't the professors. But whenever you come to any institution of higher learning, you are going to be immersed with a whole group of people that will think differently, at least to some degree, than you. And that strengthens you. It doesn't weaken you. And you shouldn't be afraid of that. We need to be teaching our children how to think and how to let God guide them through their intellect. Okay, now that doesn't mean intellect is everything. It is certainly not everything about our faith, but it's an important part of it. And so when you're at an institution of higher learning, that's one of the things that you're engaging in is building up your intellect. And that should always be and should ultimately strengthen you for God's service. And so my hope is that you would go and send your children and that you would yourself go to Adventist schools. I have gone through my entire life. I love the Adventist educational system. I think it is amazing. I think that God has brought some gifted teachers to our schools. I think they're better than the average school out there. And I think that you will get a better education if you go. And so I think it's going to be only better for you. But don't be afraid to learn. And if you hear something that challenges you, don't just condemn someone as a heretic. Ask them, well, why do you believe that? Figure it out. And then if you still disagree, that's fine. But figure out why you disagree and how you can respond in a kind way to that person. So I hope that's a good way to end. But that's how I feel.
Certainly. Thank you so much. And
yeah.
If you can just hold on for a while, don't leave before, because I do need to talk with you a little bit about Erosion when
Sure.
we can continue. But friends, it was a joy sharing today and talking with Dr. Burton. We are delighted that he was able to take time from his very busy schedule to be with us, Director of Adventist Research. That's quite a bit. Associate Professor of Church History at Andrews University. Next week, we have a very exciting program lined up for you. We want you to join us at 3 p.m. Next week. I'm going to be in Trinidad at our union session. It's going to be the Sabbath celebration convocation after the Caribbean Union session, and we will be broadcasting live from Trinidad next week. We want you to join us because we should have the president on, whoever the president is going to be, and it's going to be an exciting feature. So stay tuned next week, same time. I said stay tuned, but I mean join us next week at 3 p.m. for another episode of Let's Talk. May God bless you.